Today's episode of Dead Rabbit Radio contains content of a disturbing nature. Listener discretion is advised. When a young man is walking through the city one night, he sees a beautiful woman. Or does he? And then we take a look at the terrifying true story of a man who seemed to have it all. A great job, a loving wife, a beautiful family. But little does he know all of that is about to change the second he walked in to a movie theater. Today on Dead Rabbit Radio. Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Dead Rabbit Radio. I'm your host, Jason Carpenter. I'm having a great day. I hope you guys are having a great day too. I hope you guys are having tons of fun doing whatever you're doing. Just one more quick reminder, we do have the 5th annual Dead Rabbit Radio Thanksgiving live stream tomorrow on YouTube. When I say tomorrow, let me be more specific because I don't know when you're listening to this episode. November 23rd, 2023 at 11 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. If you come to the YouTube channel, I'll put the link in the show notes. Come and join us there for a Thanksgiving live stream. It's going to be 2 hours. Generally, they're about 2 hours long. So if you show up late, that's totally fine, but I just love to take questions from you guys. We have a great, grand old time. So if you do have a little bit of free time tomorrow, join us for our Thanksgiving live stream special, 11 a.m. Pacific Standard Time on YouTube. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take that audio, I'm going to record it on a better microphone. I know in the past the audio has been a little iffy. We're going to take that audio, we're going to upload it to the podcast app. It'll be on YouTube as well to watch whenever, but we're going to put it on the podcast app. I wanted to do an episode for Thanksgiving as well, but I just don't think time-wise I can get out a quality episode. I made a choice today. I could have 2 mediocre episodes, today and tomorrow's, or I could combine them into one cool episode. Basically, I didn't plan out my week that well. This tends to happen at the beginning of the season. I also got to say, I didn't plan it out well because you guys have probably heard the warning in the beginning. Generally, if you're doing a holiday episode or an episode near a holiday, you don't want to have such a dark story. The second story we're going to cover is going to be really creepy in a bad way. So, I mean, you listen to the first half. If I had planned it out better, probably wouldn't be in this predicament. Probably would have 2 great episodes instead of 1. Probably wouldn't have one of the episodes have real-life human tragedy in it. But what are you going to do? Jason, you've been doing this for 5 years. You can plan for this stuff. You're right. I will do that. I'll take that under advisement. Planning. Let me write that down. But someone who always has a plan for something, someone who never leaves other people hanging, running into Dead Rabbit Command right now is one of our legacy Patreon supporters. Everyone get on your feet and give it up for Radar. Woohoo, yeah! He's running on in with a bunch of turkeys, ready to feed us a Thanksgiving feast. Radar, you're going to be our captain, our pilot this episode. If you guys can't support the show financially through the Patreon or the merch store, I totally understand. I truly do. Just help spread the word about Dead Rabbit Radio. That helps out so much. Tell your friends, tell your family, tell everyone you know. Dead Rabbit Radio is your favorite paranormal show. But Radar, let's go ahead and get this episode started off in a bit of a weird way. Again, I didn't plan to do this. It just kind of popped up. I'm going to go ahead and toss you the keys of the Jason Jalopy. Everyone climb on board. We're leaving behind Dead Rabbit Radio Command. Radar, drive us all the way out to the Hood River Walmart. I wanted to talk about this real quick. It's so interesting. There's a Venn diagram. I kind of mentioned this on, I think it was yesterday's episode. We were talking about people taking medicine and having side effects of that mimics schizophrenia or just mental illness in general. And I kind of made this joke. I said, it is kind of interesting that my hobbies, or maybe I edited this out. I actually think I edited this part out. There was a part in that episode where I talked about a thing called schizotypal behavior. And it's not schizophrenia, but it's basically, you're crazy if you have this, or you're borderline crazy. And I said, it's interesting to think that my hobbies, which include, paranormal research and reading about all this stuff and discussing it with you, also could be a mental illness, depending on what culture you're in. It used to be that if you believed in the supernatural, everyone believed in the supernatural. That was the norm. But now that we're, especially in the West, a more science-based culture, when you talk about ghosts and demons and UFOs and Bigfoot and all that stuff, there's a good portion of the population that thinks you're crazy. When I was at the Oregon Ghost Conference, not the Oregon Ghost Conference, sorry, that was in Seaside, Oregon. I was at the Port Gamble Ghost Conference earlier in the month. I had a lot of fun at both of them, but I was giving my presentation and somebody asked me a question about demons. And so I began talking. During the presentation, there's a question and answer session. I just immediately go, oh, well, demons, and I kind of start going off. Well, my friend Sabine, she was in the audience, and we're both the same age. We have different backgrounds, raised differently. She was raised in a more pragmatic household, more science-based. My dad was a Southern Baptist minister. It's not like he hated science. He loves science as well, but we grew up more in a household where the supernatural was not only possible, but real. And now, to be fair, he never really talked about ghosts or anything like that. But it was about demons. And it was interesting, on the ride back home, Sabine said to me, she goes, I think you're the first person that I've ever met that believes in demons. She said, I have never met someone before who believes that demons are real. And I thought about it for a second, and I said, well, I'm probably the first person who admits that they believe demons are real. I go, you've probably met other people who do believe in demons, but not everybody wants to talk about it openly. And so I went home and I looked it up to see, because I want to focus on Americans, easier to get polling data. I go, how many Americans believe in demons? 45% of Americans believe in demons. I'm taking this from a YouGov poll back in 2019. 45% of Americans believe in demons. 45% of Americans believe in ghosts. 46% believe in other supernatural beings. So that's probably the same 45% with an added 1% for maybe like fairies, elves, something like that. Interestingly enough, 13% of Americans believe in vampires. Which, here's the thing. I believe in psychic vampires. Vampires are the one thing I really wish did exist. I really wish there were vampires out there. Now, it could be because I'm a huge fan. It's probably only because I'm a huge fan of Buffy and Angel. But the idea, because you can't really fight a demon. The power level is just too vast between a human and a demon. Demons are way stronger. But, I think you could take a vampire. Like, Jason, have you seen those shows? You have to be a superhero to fight a vampire. Well, still, I think I could be like Blade. Probably a little bit more like Pearl on some days. But I think sometimes I could be a Blade. 13% of Americans believe in vampires. I believe in psychic vampires. I believe that they're very rare. But I do. The blood-sucking vampires that live forever, Well, anyways, 13% of Americans. That's pretty dope, honestly. Really, I wish that I could say that I 100% believed in vampires. So where am I going with any of this stuff? What I thought was super interesting, because I was talking about schizotypal behavior. Part of it is the belief, it's magical thinking. It's one of the, if you have two, and I'll put that in the show notes as well. There are things like social anxiety. You don't like being around groups of people. It doesn't mean you're crazy, but it just means you're an outcast, basically. This schizotypal behavior is kind of an outcast type of personality. One of them is believing in magical thinking, believing in ghosts, believing that there are people around that other people can't see, but not like schizophrenic, not like imagining people, believing that there's telepathy. Stuff I believe in, basically. Stuff I believe in was in a list of things that say you might exhibit schizotypal behavior. Where am I going with this? Well, today I was walking home, and this is so interesting because I understand very well that what I believe in and mental illness, there's a Venn diagram. And It's not a complete circle, but there is a lot of overlap there. And I have to be aware of that. I walked down to Walmart to pick up some last minute stuff for Thanksgiving. And then I said, buy some chili and rice. I'll have a chili and rice dinner tonight because I haven't had that in such a long time. And walk down, great mood, right? Have my headphones on. It's a beautiful day. Walk down there. Go grocery shopping. Totally fine. Leave. And when I walk out of the Walmart, I get a feeling that I left something behind or something's not right. I got a feeling that something wasn't right when I was walking out of the Walmart. I keep going. Keep walking. And then I keep getting a feeling, and it's hard for me to say whether it was a feeling or if something was catching the corner of my eye, but as I'm walking, I kept turning to my left. I kept thinking there was someone just a couple feet behind me. Like it felt like I was almost seeing the tip of its shadow. You're walking, and it's that time of the day where the shadows are kind of leaning forward because where the sun's at. And I keep thinking there's someone behind me. Now, there's always people walking behind me or in front of me. No big deal. I would just move out of the way, but I turned and there was no one behind me. I keep walking. I walk maybe another 30, 40 yards and someone behind me, and I turn and there's no one behind me. And this happens quite a few times. And now I'm getting nervous. And I'm not thinking that there's a ghost or something behind me. I'm not thinking there's a demon behind me or some sort of attachment. Something is following me home. Because that would be paranoid. That would be crazy. But it keeps happening. And now I'm starting to get anxious. Now I'm starting to get the little bit of tip of an anxiety attack coming because I feel like I'm being followed. And it's funny, I've said before on this show, if I was being gang stalked, I would never ever know because while I have high situational awareness, I have very low memory awareness. The same white car could drive by me 20 times. I wouldn't realize it was the same white car. I'd be the worst gang stalking target ever. Now, if that car was following me, then I would pick up on it pretty quickly. But then if they turned and then I kept driving and they got back behind me, it would take me a while to think that I wouldn't recognize that as the same car unless it had something goofy about it. So I'm walking, and I feel like at this point, and now as I'm walking, I'm thinking, okay, you do believe in the paranormal. Something could be following you. But at the same time, now you're having an anxiety attack, so you just might be super anxious because you got a lot of work to do. I think at this point, I'd already made the decision to only do one episode instead of two, which I had said that earlier in the week, and I feel like I'm letting you guys down. I think I could have been like, well, maybe I could get two done. I was like, no, I'd rather have one good episode than two. And I'm kind of like debating that in my head. I'm listening to music. I listen to gangster rap most of the time. There's a lot of pop mixed in as well, but it's very violent music. It's like 1990s gangster rap. Like, it's just people dying over and over and over again. Now, here, I've been listening to that music my entire life. But when you start to get anxious and you start to feel like there's something negative around you, it's probably not great to be bumping Spice One and top volume right into your brain. I'm walking and I feel this. I feel this something is behind me, or is it? And that's the great debate with the world of the paranormal versus, and I don't think I'm mentally ill. But here's the thing. You have to be aware that could be a cause of some of this phenomenon. Even me, especially when I first started seeing ghosts, I thought, that's it. I'm crazy. I've gone insane. And when I'm walking down the street and I keep thinking I'm seeing something, just a glimpse of a shadow, and not like a shadow man, but as if someone was walking behind me and casting a shadow, and you just see like the tip of the head on the ground, and I would turn around and there'd be no one there. And what's funny is I finally was like, if there's some, I'm thinking this, I wasn't saying this on the side of the street because then that would be insane. I was thinking this, I go, if there's something behind me, you're not invited to my house. If there's something following me home, I am not giving you permission to follow me home. And it's very interesting because I normally don't do that. I normally don't think that specific thought. I never take it to that level, right? But then again, I've never had this particular feeling either. I'm walking down the street and I go, you are not welcome here. You're not welcome following me home. And when I finally got to my place, I repeated that in my head. You're not welcome. You cannot come in here. And then I came into my place. And I sat down, I bought myself a little Lunchables. I got the chili and rice. I'm going to eat that after this episode, but I ate a Lunchables for lunch. And I'm eating it up. Ham and cheddar, a little vanilla cookies. Eating it up. I'm just watching YouTube. And then it's like, okay, it's time to start recording the podcast. And I sit down and I then flub every possible thing I could do wrong just to get this podcast started. I couldn't even say the words Dead Rabbit Radio. I kept tripping over my tongue. I might even leave it, I might even put it at the end so you guys can hear how chaotic it was just getting this episode started. And in my mind, I'm thinking, this is just a coincidence. The fact that I can't get this episode started, this has happened before. You've flubbed the lines before. That's why you like to edit more than you like to do live streams. Every time I'm trying to talk, a car's driving by. I will. I'm gonna put the first 5 minutes of this episode at the end so you can hear how chaotic it was. Cars are driving by. My neighbor standing right outside my door having a conversation on the cell phone. It was nuts, just trying to get this started. And I'm thinking, this is the point, Jason, where you make in your mind, is this a real paranormal event? Did something follow you home and is trying to somehow interrupt this podcast? Or are you taking very, very mundane elements, things that happen all the time, and now you are giving something dark or something that doesn't exist? Are you giving that power over you? Because you can easily just keep flubbing this, and you start to get frustrated because you think something is interfering with the podcast. Or you can just go, you make these mistakes all the time, just keep going, get started, you'll be good. Super interesting. I mean, I hope it was interesting. I didn't plan on talking about that. Like, all of this literally happened within the past hour. I find it fascinating because what I love so much, the world of the paranormal, it can sound crazy. And I think it can lead into craziness. Like, imagine if I then had to start blessing my studio every single time before I started recording. It's probably not a bad idea, actually, now that I think about it. But you know what I mean? Like, imagine if I actually thought something could follow me home and interrupt what I love doing the most, which is doing the show with you. Like, I'd be giving it power over me. I refuse to give it power over me. I will chalk all that stuff up to coincidences. But it's a slippery slope. It really is. Like, I see why sometimes the belief in the paranormal, investigating the paranormal specifically, because you're delving into it, can drive you mad. There's this famous quote. I'll see if I can put it in the... I'll probably just drop it in the audio because it's on YouTube. It is... who was that guy who was in... People are going to hate me. This is how I describe him. He was in Lord of the Rings, and he was Count Dooku. Christopher Lee. Christopher Lee was asked if he had a vast library of occultic books. If he had this vast... it was this old interview, and they were asking him, I heard that you had, like, one of the biggest collections of the occult. And I'll go ahead and drop that audio clip in here right now. His answer is fascinating, and I think it's quite true as well.
Up in the back there? It's well known that you have a huge interest in the occult and one of the largest collections of books.
I don't have a huge collection. Somebody wrote I had 20,000 books. I'd had to live in a bath. I have maybe 4 or 5. I have The Devil Rides Out, first edition, signed to me by Dennis Wheatley. There's a book just come out about him called The Devil is a Gentleman. And I have met people who claimed to be Satanists, who claimed to be involved with black magic, who claimed that they not only knew a lot about it, but as I said, I've certainly never been involved, and I warn all of you, never, never, never. You will not only lose your mind, you lose your soul.
So that's the thing. Like, it's most likely I was just a little agitated, and it's nice. I'm looking forward to Thanksgiving. Going to have a lot of fun, and maybe I don't know. Maybe anxiety attacks, especially with me, don't ever really seem to have a trigger. I could have just been having an anxiety attack. There could have been something following me home. I think it's possible. Here's the thing: it's possible. I don't think it's likely. But I have anxiety attacks. Usually they center on myself. Usually I think I'm dying. That's what the anxiety attack is. I can't think of another time I've had an anxiety attack that there's an external force nearby. I don't think I've ever had an anxiety attack like that. So maybe something was following me home. I said, you can't come in here, which, again, I've never done before. But to be fair, I've never felt anything following me like that. But I said, you're not allowed in here. I did some other internal spiritual protection. Let this thing know that I was not a victim. Let this thing know that it was not welcome in my life. And we'll see how it goes, right? Like, as you're listening to this podcast, you're reading the news, just like, local Hood River man Jason Carpenter burst into flames on Thanksgiving Day. You're like, wow, I guess something did follow him. I guess that he was wrong. He needed a little bit more than just telling it. I think a lot of times that is the key, is that you do say, I'm not allowing you to be. Sometimes it's that simple. I do not give you power over me. Because what's interesting, the reason why I don't say that, and the reason why I sounded kind of goofy thinking it, because I go, it sounds, I don't want to say it sounds lame, because I know a lot of people do it. I know a lot of listeners have told me that it's helped them. They're like, oh, he thinks I'm lame. It sounds too easy. But at the same time, that's what we do to humans, right? If a human is bugging us, we say, dude, I don't even want to hang out with you anymore. Why are you here? Leave. And most of the time, that'll work with a human as well. They'll be like, okay. Unless they're like a criminal or something. You got a gun to your head, you're like, I will not allow myself to be robbed. They're like, well, sometimes just saying it out, right, can solve 90% of the problems. I don't like you. Why are you talking to me? I know we work together, but we are not friends. Leave me alone. Oh, sorry, I didn't know you felt that way. And they just kind of go on to psychically drain other people. They were the psychic vampire all along. But it also is, it's weird because it could be a real paranormal phenomenon that I experienced today. Very unlikely. Could be my anxiety exhibiting itself in a way that it hadn't before. But to be fair, I've never really been followed, never felt like I was followed like that before. I had a blue boy follow me around. I'll put that episode in the show notes, but I didn't feel it come home with me. It just started appearing later. This one I felt like something was trying to follow me. But my love of the paranormal to a rational person, it sounds insane. It does sound insane. To 50, I have to do math now. To 50, what's 100 minus 45 would be 55% of America. I would be mentally ill for thinking that something may have followed me home. And you want to know what's funny? I want to wrap it up like this. I almost didn't do this segment. Because I felt by even talking about it, I might be giving it more power because I'm acknowledging it exists. But I was like, no, I actually am going to talk about this because this is important. We do stand on that precipice between the world of the supernatural and madness. Deep, dark, and true madness. And sometimes it's hard. Sometimes it's hard for us to tell the difference because so much of it does seem insane when we sit and talk about it. When I'm on stage talking about demons, Sabine's like, what in the world? Like, I've never met anyone in my life, and she's my age. We're both 47. I've never met anyone in my life who's ever just openly talked about demons. I didn't think anyone believed in demons anymore. I didn't think any adult that I came into contact with believed in demons. And here's Jason on stage giving a presentation. He's like, well, demons, blah, 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 blah. Talking about it the same way someone might talk about an emperor penguin or a type of tree. It does seem insane. And sometimes I think it could lead you into, if we can't, like, imagine if I thought from now on, every time I stubbed my toe or something fell off my fridge, or I'm walking in and a car honks at me and scares me. Imagine if I chalked that up to that dark presence is still around me. That dark presence is still following me around. That would drive me mad. I would not be able to function after a matter of months. I would be taking every negative thing in my life and attributing it to this dark entity. And here's the thing. It may not exist at all. It may have existed and it's gone. It may still be trying to get in. I don't know. It could be attached to me. I don't think that's the case. But imagine whether or not it's attached, I still thought it was. Whether or not it was real, I still believed that it was. And every single thing in my life that went wrong, I attributed to that force. I'd be giving it power over me. Fascinating stuff. And if it was real and I was giving it power over me, then it's getting stronger. And I do have to eventually confront it. If it doesn't exist at all, and I'm giving it power, then I'm walking down the hallway, the long, empty hallway towards an insane mind. And really, I think that would be the worst case scenario, is going insane. You can always, even though demons are stronger than humans, I'm basically saying it's a lot easier to fight a demon than it is to stop being insane. But interesting story. I hope you found it interesting as well. I actually didn't have it on my doc to talk about. It all just kind of popped up right there. And I'm trying to think. You know what? Let's go ahead, because this is the perfect segue. It really, really is. I didn't plan any of this, but this is the way the universe works out sometimes. Radar, I'm going to go ahead and toss you the keys of the Carpenter copter. We are leaving behind Hood River. Fly us all the way out to New York City. And I gotta say, this is where the episode gets really disturbing. We'll save the beautiful woman story for next week. This story is disturbing. It's so I usually like this show because you can go to your Thanksgiving, your holiday family gatherings, what have you, and you could be like, oh, dude, I've listened to this crazy podcast. You got to check it out. At least that's what I hope you guys are talking about. They're like, hey, how you been? I don't want to talk about me. I want to talk about this podcast. Maybe I can give you a couple cool stories to tell. You can tell this one at your Thanksgiving party. I don't think you're going to get invited back. This one's crazy, but it truly is. It's oddly related to what I just talked about. We're in New York City. It's May 2007. And we're about to meet a man. His name is Alberto Izaga. Alberto Izaga is 36 years old, and he has the world in the palm of his hand. He's an executive at a huge insurance firm called Swiss Re. I've never heard of it. It's a European thing. It can't be that big. I've never heard of it, but Alberto Izaga, he's visiting New York with his family. They normally live in London. It's weird, right? It's called Swiss Re, but they live in London. They're in New York. Don't get confused. You don't need to take notes. There's not going to be a test at the end. You're going to wish you forgot this story. Alberto's hanging out in New York with his lovely wife, Lagia. She's 35 years old, and together they have a 2-year-old daughter named Yanair. Life is great, man. They're living back in London in a $1 million apartment looking out over the Thames River. That's how you pronounce that, right? the Times. I don't think you add the river part, though. You're like, yeah, pronunciation's right, but you don't say river. They're looking out over the Times. He has tons of friends, good family. You can't get it any better than what Alberto has right now. And while they're in New York City, Alberto's walking around with his wife, and they see a movie theater, and they're like, hey, let's go see a movie. Let's go see a movie in a New York movie theater. Hope we don't get stabbed in the back of the neck. Because New York is a cesspool. But we'll go into this movie theater, and this is so weird because people do this. This isn't something that I've really ever done, I can think. I do it when I'm like at home renting movies, like streaming movies, looking for something to watch. But there are people who will show up at the movie theater and they don't know what to watch. That's why movie titles are so important. That's why when you have a movie called Suicide Squad and it doesn't do well to the theater, it could be. People have no idea what that movie is about. They presume it's about people committing suicide. And there are people who go to the theater and go, what's playing? And they look up and it's all these movies. You're like, wow, Killers of a Flower Moon? What? Napoleon? I know that guy. Five Nights at Freddy's. That sounds like a porno. Well, they go to the movies, and there's only one movie that has seats available, apparently. I don't know how big this movie theater was, but because that's insane. I don't know what else was coming out in May 2007. But the only seats were available for a movie called Bug. Now, I don't know much about Alberto or his wife, Lagia, but if you got $1 million apartment looking out over the Times, I don't think you're watching Bug. I don't think that's a movie that you would ever think to watch. I watched Bug. I waited for Bug to come out because it sounded dope. Watched it years ago. I watched it on video with a good friend of mine. Bug is a movie directed by William Friedkin, the guy who directed The Exorcist and Sorcerer, which is like really in probably my type. It's been years since I've seen it, but it might be in my top 50 movies. Sorcerer. But he's most famous for The Exorcist, which I've never seen. He directed The Exorcist, he directed Sorcerer. He's directed a bunch of stuff, but he did this movie called Bug, starring Ashley Judd and Michael Shannon, most famously known as General Zod from The Flash. See, I don't think the Dark Entity did that. I think that was just people having a conversation right outside my door. Michael Shannon and Ashley Judd, they basically play... The whole movie takes place in a hotel room. And it's about two people who are feeding off each other's paranoia. It's been years since I've seen it. I did see it like in 2007. And I read the Wikipedia article to get ready for this. But basically, it's about two paranoid people who are... I believe it was originally a play. Two paranoid people who are in a hotel room. And Michael Shannon said that he used to be in the military. And they're looking for him. The army scientists are looking for him because they implanted these tracking devices in him. He was some sort of a government agent. So they were doing all these experiments on him. And he had these bugs in his skin. And she starts to see the bugs too. We're kind of seeing the movie from their 2 points of view. And you are watching the movie thinking, is he really a government experiment escaping from a lab? Or is this guy just crazy? And they start doing crazy stuff to the point where one part of the movie, they've covered the hotel room in tinfoil. So the tracking signals cannot reach in. That's pretty benign, right? That's just going to cost a lot of money. And then you're probably going to have to pay the motel to clean all that garbage up. That's pretty benign. They also take a pair of pliers and pull out one of Michael Shannon's teeth. And in doing so, it's crushed to pieces, revealing a bunch of bug eggs inside of his tooth. Or does it? Is it just two paranoid people trapped in each other's delusions? It's an interesting movie. It really is an interesting movie. I enjoyed it. Well, Alberto and Lagia, they didn't post their reviews on IMDb. We don't know how much they liked it, but to say that watching the movie Bug had a profound effect on Alberto would be an understatement. Shortly after that, Alberto takes a trip to Geneva to see this motivational speaker, this guy named Mike Horn. He's an adventurer, and he's all about pushing yourself as far as you can. He seems pretty cool. I looked him up on Wikipedia. He doesn't have any bugs in his teeth. I looked him up a bit. He's basically just like a guy, like, you got to keep striving for the best. If you think you can't go any further, take 2 more steps, you can do it. And I can understand, like, business executives wanting to go, really anybody getting advice from someone who's been to the most extremes of the world. He traveled the equator in a year and a half using no mechanized vehicles. So, I mean, a sailboat's kind of mechanized. It's just the wind is the pedal. But, I guess he was walking through the Amazon and stuff like that. And then he got to the... Actually, now I think about it, that's not that big of a deal because most of the world is water. So he could, I could walk through the Amazon and then I just get to the shoreline and I'm on a boat for 2/3 of my journey. I'm just like, the wind's blowing and I'm eating pizza. Yum, yum, yum. And then I get to Africa and I just walk more. Now that I could be this guy, I could do this guy. As long as he doesn't have bugs in his teeth. Me and Mike Horn, we're 2 peas in a pod. Anyways, he goes, sees Mike at this speaking conference. So this is all really happening in May. He goes and he watches the movie Bug in New York, which I'd be afraid I'd get real bugs on me going into a New York movie theater. Go see Mike Horn. It's June 3rd, 2007. So it's really less than a month since he saw the movie Bug. It's 4:30 a.m. Lagia wakes up because Alberto is walking around the bedroom. Lagia, you don't understand. You don't get it. Nobody gets it. Nobody gets it that it's the Jesuits. The Jesuits are in control. They're in control of everything, Lagia. They're in control of everything. I went and saw Mike Horn a couple weeks ago, that explorer guy, and he really brought into my mind the Jesuits. I can't believe I didn't understand that it was the Jesuits all along, but Lagia, it goes way deeper than that. It's deeper than Mike. It's deeper than the Jesuits. It's me, Lagia. It's me. I found out the worst secret possible. Swiss Re, the company that I work for, we control the world. We control everything. It's all being covered up. But I understand it because we have a plan. We have a plan. And what we're going to do is we're going to take over the financial sector because without money, you can't do anything. Whoever controls the money controls the world. Swiss Re, by the time we're done with this, will be more powerful than the Jesuits. We'll buy the equator. We can walk around it all day long. You gotta understand. You gotta understand. I get it now. You gotta understand, Lagia. You gotta understand. You gotta understand. It's gibberish. It's absolute gibberish. What do the Jesuits have to do with Mike Horn? What do they have to do with his company? And Lagia's sitting there and she's watching her husband just rant and rave. And then he starts talking about Bug. That movie, it opened my eyes. I understand now. We're all experiments. It's not just one room. It's not just 2 people in one room. It's everybody. They know everything we do all of the time. You have to understand that this is a system, and the system is set up to crush, crush, crush. Crush us like bugs, but we're not the bugs. The bugs are inside of us. It's gibberish, right? He's just going on and on. The system crushing. Okay, that part, he was right about that part. It doesn't say specifically what I'm adding it all in the details, but it says that he just began ranting about the Jesuits and Mike Horn and the movie Bug and his company trying to take over the financial system. But really what she was saying was it didn't make any sense. What he was saying, did not make any sense. And she's so concerned about him. She doesn't know what to do. He's sobbing now as he's just going on, ranting and raving. And this lasts for 4 hours. It's June 3rd, 2007. They're back at home in London. The New York trip is over. The trip to Geneva, seeing the speaker, that's all done. They're back at home in London. It's 4:30 in the morning. This goes on for 4 hours. He's just ranting and raving, and she doesn't know what to do. It's totally unlike him. And what he's saying is totally unlike him, and she doesn't understand any of it. And he's just going on and on. And she eventually calls a friend of hers because she doesn't know what to do. You think like, well, hindsight. So obviously 2020, you understand you don't necessarily want to call the police too early because it's so weird. Like, you would go, well, you could call the police or a hospital, but in the same situation, if you were sitting there and your significant other or just a friend of yours, who they weren't doing any drugs or anything, all of a sudden it hopped up and started talking crazy stuff for 4 hours, I necessarily wouldn't call the cops. I wouldn't think they were at a danger to themselves. They're ranting and raving about the Jesuits. It'd be concerning. But she calls a friend, and her friend doesn't pick up. It goes to voicemail. At this point, it would be about 8:30 in the morning. It goes to voicemail, and the voicemail starts recording, and we can hear some of what Alberto was saying on the voicemail recording. We actually have some quotes. And you hear Alberto screaming. He begins screaming out loud. And at this point, he's screaming so loud that neighbors are starting to come over, knocking on, hey, what's going on in there? This is a very posh neighborhood. The screaming comes from the lower class neighborhood. Very, very, I have to make the jokes now because it's about to go downhill real quick. He's screaming and neighbors are walking over. They're knocking on the door. Hey guys, is everything okay in there? The voicemail is recording this. The friend's voicemail is recording this. He starts screaming, death! Death! And he runs over and he picks up his 2-year-old daughter. He picks up little Yanir. As he's holding his daughter, he shouts out, quote, I know what to do. I have to kill her. And he begins punching her in the face while screaming out, die! Die! There is nothing left. God doesn't exist. The universe doesn't exist. Humanity doesn't exist. While he's punching his daughter repeatedly in the head, he stops and then begins slamming her over and over again onto the floor. The neighbors at this point, I don't know if Leguia let him in or if they broke in because they just hear all this chaos. The neighbors reported what they had heard him saying, and when they got in, he was holding his daughter. She was just covered in blood. And Alberto was holding her body. She's still alive, clinging to life. He's holding onto her, and he's just saying, Big Ben. Big Ben, Big Ben, Big Ben, Big. I mean, it almost sounds too crazy to be real, right? That's like something you would see in a movie. That seems like it's the over-the-top violence and like the chanting the nonsensical phrase at the end of the scene, just over and over and over again, Big Ben. But the witnesses are like, no, he was nuts. Like, that's the reason why sometimes they show people that nutty in the media is because they can get that nutty. The police come out, and while they're grabbing him and trying to drag him out of the house, he starts trying to do exercises. He's completely lost his mind. He has zero idea of where he's at this point. He's like doing exercises and he's laughing. And I'll say that there's something to be said about the restraint, not the physical restraints that they put him in, but the restraint of those police officers having to drag a man away from the bloodied body of his 2-year-old daughter, and for them to not execute him in the middle of the street. Like, that takes restraint. Cops see a lot of horrible stuff in their life, but seeing something like that, I'm sure that was contemplated. I'm sure that was contemplated at some point on that ride back to the station. Like, we could just pull over and end this. You have a laughing man in the back of your squad car, knowing what you had just seen, and thinking, we could say anything. We could say he tried to escape or go for a gun, or so. We can end this right now. But they didn't. But they took him in, and Yanir lived for another 2 days before she passed away in the hospital. She did die 2 days later. And what's interesting is this is one of those cases where both the prosecutors and the defense said, this guy's nuts. Like, this guy is insane. He's not competent to stay in trial. Like, it was the early hearings, right? You have the competency hearings and all this stuff. The prosecution was like, yeah, this guy's crazy. Like, this isn't like he's faking it. Now, generally, when we look at people claiming insanity, they have to have a lifelong history of in and out of hospitals and showing that they had this type of childhood and they're like this as adults. It's not something where you can just snap and then you get off due to insanity. It's actually quite rare. And the media makes it seem like it's often. Well, people always say they're insane. People always use that as a defense. It almost never works. But the prosecution goes, nah, his brain's scrambled. This guy's a nut. But the way we're going to do it is we're going to put him in a mental hospital until he's fit to stand trial. And then once that happens, we will put him on trial for the murder of his daughter. So it's not like he's going to walk free. He will be in a mental institution until he can be in prison. Now, his wife said she visits her husband every day. She visits her husband every day in the mental asylum. They're still trying to hold on to each other in such great despair. I don't know if that... I mean, I'm getting these articles from 2008. And I couldn't find anything more current. I wonder if she still does that. I wonder if he's still in the mental hospital, too. Actually, I'm surprised I didn't double check that. Let me double check that real quick. This is interesting. I know I should be wrapping the episode up, but I found this online. It was a Spanish article. It didn't show up in my original research. It gives us a little bit more of a timeline. Apparently, he woke up. He hadn't slept for 3 days. He woke up at 4:30 in the morning, was talking about, quote, the philosophy of the Jesuits. I guess he studied at a Jesuit university. At 6 a.m., his wife tells him to go back to bed. That's when he starts screaming and crying. His wife tells him not to scream, so not to wake up the girl. He goes and he picks up his daughter and then starts hitting her. And Leguia says, stop. And so he does, and they sit down on the couch with the girl resting on her father's back. And then it says, but Alberto starts screaming once again, apparently impressed by the horror movie Bug. At that moment, his wife tries to leave the apartment, but he stops her. And then at that point, he... and they have the name... the daughter's name spelled differently, Janair, which may be how it's pronounced, but he's still in a mental hospital, it appears. I'm looking at the more recent articles. So yeah, he is still in there. I don't know if she still visits him, though. I mean, that would be so... But, you know, it's a crazy story, and we've kind of been talking about madness as a theme this week, and really as a theme this episode. it's terrifying to think that at any point you could just flip out like that. And here's the thing, like, it would be one thing if I think, well, to my example, I go, oh no, something's following me around, so there's some dark energy around me, and then I think I've handled it, but let's say I go out and buy some sage, and I start saging the place, and I still feel it's around me, so I go to a local minister for a blessing or whatever. You know, those are kind of mild things, and it would interfere with my life, because obviously I got more things to do. I can't be walking around getting blessed by people. I'm pretty busy. I'm too busy to be blessed. I'm going to make a shirt that says that. That's just the type of paranoia that can kind of interfere with your day-to-day. Hopefully you manage it. This guy, I mean, it just popped up. It was just there. I mean, going 3 days without sleep is not good for anyone, even someone in a healthy mental state. But he, by all accounts, was in a healthy mental state. And he's not anymore. Now he's sitting in a mental asylum. And it's not like they show in the movies where you get to sit around and play ping pong. You're heavily medicated in those places. Well, I guess in America, I should say. They go, American mental asylums, they're worse than prison. You have zero freedom. At least in prison, you can like watch television, read the newspaper, stuff like that. But it's a terrifying story. Was this man just... anything was going to set him off? Was there something about the movie Bug that started this whole thing? It did seem to be a bizarre catalyst to it. He seemed to be fine. He did that. He saw Mike Horn. And then... which I don't think he had anything to do with it. Probably should stop mentioning his name in the podcast. I don't think he had anything to do with it. I don't think the Jesuits had anything to do with it. I don't think Swiss Re had anything to do with it. I don't really think Bug had anything to do with it. But what's interesting to note, I keep going back to that movie, is that there was a big conspiracy theory, and it's still kind of around. You know, William Friedkin directed Bug. He directed The Exorcist. There was a conspiracy theory that The Exorcist, this almost deserves its own episode, but The Exorcist was a CIA op. That it was actually made. And here's the thing, and it's not, this conspiracy theory may or may not be true, but the guy who wrote the book The Exorcist that the movie's based on, William Blatty, he used to work for the CIA. And he was part of an operation the CIA ran during the Vietnam War to use religion against the North Vietnamese, telling them that the Virgin Mary was no longer in the North, that Jesus had fled south. They were using religious iconography because Vietnam was originally controlled by France. Catholicism had a strong foothold there. They were using religious theology, iconography against North Vietnamese. And then when William Blatty wrote The Exorcist, there's a belief that was the CIA saw that America was getting too free love, hippie-ish, turning their back on the rules of Christ. As far as the CIA was concerned, they were turning their back on Western civilization by going out with the free love movement, the drug, anti-war, all that stuff. Bring them back to Christ. So the conspiracy theory is William Blatty wrote The Exorcist, which is based on a true story, but it's a fictional version of the true story, to scare Americans back into their churches. And by an extension, William Friedkin's movie, The Exorcist, was doing that as well. Now, they say the movie makes some differences, makes some different changes. It's different than the book. It's not so cut and dry. But I imagine there were people who went back to church after seeing The Exorcist. Like, again, I've never seen The Exorcist. I read a little bit about it while I was prepping. I know everyone's telling me I need to watch The Exorcist. I'm probably shocked that I've never seen it, but apparently it's about like a single mother. And they were saying like that element was put in there because that was showing the destruction of the family in America. They wanted the mother to be too distracted because she was a single mom. That was one of the reasons that allowed her daughter to get possessed in the first place, because she was too busy worrying about, you know, all the other stuff that she wouldn't have to worry about that if she had a husband. I probably should have seen it just so I could talk about it as much as I am, but they said the book definitely, or I shouldn't say definitely, the conspiracy theory is, yes, the book was a CIA plot, the movie possibly as well. And I'm sure a lot of movies in Hollywood don't get made without CIA. I don't even think that's a conspiracy theory. I think that's pretty true. We know a lot of action movies need to get, they don't need to, but they'll get free vehicles, basically. You get to fly around in jets. If you get the permission of the U.S. Army, they'll read your scripts, your U.S. Navy or whatever, they'll read your scripts. And if it's pro-America, if it's pro the ideas that the military is putting forward, then yeah, you can shoot on bases, you can use uniforms to save a ton of money, right? If you, instead of having to buy Hummers, you could sit there and use actual Hummers that the military has used. They'll help fund your movie in a way. I mean, I don't even know if that's a conspiracy theory at this point. I think that, and I'm not saying that every script gets sent to Langley, and the CIA is actually looking over it, but you would have people in high levels of movie studios, television studios, music studios, and basically they just rubber stamp everything. But if they ever see a script that has something that's questionable in it, they'll be like, nah, take that out. We don't need that scene. And the director's like, huh, what? Just rewrite it. Just rewrite it. You can do that. Just rewrite that scene. They would control it like that. It doesn't have to be superficial. Conspiracy theories don't need to be really, really advanced. You just have somebody look at something and go, nah, take that out. And you go, okay, sure, because they're a producer. They've been a producer for 40 years. Their name's on a ton of different hits. You don't even think about it. But what you don't realize is that producer also gets an extra $80,000 a year from the CIA to do exactly that, to look through scripts and rubber stamp them. But if there's something a little problematic in it, just tell them to change it. And if they don't change it, now you can start leaning on them. Now you can start to see evidence of a conspiracy. But for the most part, a writer or director is going to be like, yeah, sure, whatever. Right? If a storied producer, a guy who's been around for decades and you know and you trust them, tells you to fix something, you might argue a little bit, but at the end of the day, you're like, whatever. It wasn't that important anyways. And what you don't realize is they were taking that out. There was a concentrated effort to keep that type of scene out of a movie. And here's the thing. So we could look at, I got to wrap this up, but we could look at this one of two ways, bringing it back to Bug, where you could have a movie like Bug. It's a weird movie. I remember it, which is notable because I don't watch as many movies as I used to because the podcast takes up a lot of time, but average I would watch hundreds of movies a year. Some of them I watch maybe half and shut it off. Most of them I finish. I remember Bug. It left a mark on me in that aspect, the fact that I remember it all these years later. And you could look at it this way. It could have been that the movie is not necessarily created by the CIA, not necessarily endorsed by the CIA, but there could be elements in it. They're working with William Friedkin again, and he may not even know it. There could be elements in that would be what we would call a cognitohazard or cursed media. There could be stuff in this movie to drive you mad. It's a test. I don't think that... let me back up. Let's put on our conspiracy caps for this, because obviously what we're talking about here is a truly tragic true crime story. I don't want to take away from that at all. Now we're in the realm of conspiracy theory. The fact that this young girl was killed by her father is utterly despicable. It's a horrible story. I don't want to downplay that at all. But now let's put on our conspiracy caps to wrap this episode up. It wouldn't be out of the realm of possibility to create a movie that could... Well, you could argue maybe it's not possible, Jason. You're talking about sci-fi stuff, but you create a cognitohazard, you create a movie to drive someone mad, and the intended target may not have been Alberto. It probably wasn't. What's interesting is that this was a very limited release movie. It was an independent film. I remember it was a big deal Ashley Judd was in it because it was so weird and independent, and this was back when she was a bigger star from like Kiss the Girls and stuff like that. You have a movie that drives people mad. I can guarantee that most of the people who saw this movie saw it on video, did not see it at the movie theater. And I said I saw it with my friends. My friends were active meth users. They weren't smoking around me at the time, especially not while watching the movie. But they did meth. They wanted to see it. It was a documentary as far as they were concerned. We watched Bug. I'm not saying that everyone who watched Bug was on meth, but I think there was a bit of a Venn diagram for that one. I do. I think it targeted a group of people who liked independent films, so it's a small group, but then also liked independent horror movies, independent government conspiracy movies, dark things, macabre media. So if you had 100,000 people watch this movie, and half of a percent of them ended up going crazy, acting violently, just becoming completely unhinged a few weeks after watching the movie, would you be able to tell the difference? If you had an audience base that already was weird, right? Already saying crazy stuff, doing meth, watching really dark movies, watching real creepy stuff, independent creepy stuff. It's not The Nun 2. And then that person went out and, after staying up for 3 days straight, attacked someone randomly walking down the street. You wouldn't go, wow, that was really out of character for that person. You wouldn't go, wow, he must have just gone insane. You would have said, well, I knew that was going to happen. That guy was a weirdo. That guy's been a weirdo for years. You go to his house, look at the movies he watches. He watches the weirdest stuff. Now, when it's a guy who lives in $1 million apartment, that would stick out like a sore thumb. It would be so bizarre it would make headlines all over the world. Because people like him don't do things like that. But if it was a handful of people who already live life on the edge, become completely unhinged when they watch this weird independent film, that would never make the headlines, because you wouldn't even make the connection. You'd be like, that guy was always a little off. He always talked about crazy stuff. He was always getting in fights. I think he did meth. He was always talking about bugs. When that guy did something, when that guy beat up his best friend or kicked his girlfriend down the stairs or attacked a cop because he was running around the neighborhood screaming at the top of his lungs, when the police showed up, he bit the cop's face, they're just going to get hauled off to jail, and it will just be considered more of the same. They wouldn't make the connections. They wouldn't make that also these people had watched the movie Bug and just a few weeks later gone crazy. Because even in the end, that's what he was talking about, the movie Bug. It influenced him in some way. Now, whether he had an underlying mental illness and this movie was the spark that ignited it for whatever reason, or he lived a completely normal life until one day him and his wife walked into a movie theater in New York to sit down and watch a movie, any movie, and that movie turned out to be Bug, we don't know. What we do know, though, is that Alberto will spend the rest of his life in either a mental asylum or a prison cell. But the movie Bug is still available to stream on almost all popular platforms. DeadRabbitRadio@gmail.com is going to be our email address. You can also hit us up at Facebook.com/DeadRabbitRadio. TikTok is at DeadRabbitRadio. Dead Rabbit Radio is the daily paranormal, conspiracy, and true crime podcast. You don't have to listen to it every day. I'm glad you listened to it today. Have a great weekend, guys. And happy Thanksgiving. If I don't see you for the live stream, happy Thanksgiving. Today's episode of Dead Rabbit Radio contains content of a disturbing nature. Today's episode of Dead Rabbit Radio contains content of a disturbing nature. What do I say? Today's episode of Dead Rabbit. Nope. No. Today's episode of Dead Rabbit Today's episode of Dead Rabbit Radio contains Today's episode of Dead Rabbit Radio Today's episode of Dead Rabbit Today's episode of Dead Rabbit Radio contains content of a disturbing nature. Today's episode of Dead Rabbit Radio contains content of a disturbing nature. Listener cut. Today's episode of Dead Rabbit Today's episode of Dead Rabbit why am I having a hard time with this? Dead Rabbit Today's episode of 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 Dead Rabbit Radio contains content of a disturbing nature. Listener discretion is advised. When a man is walking through a park, he sees a beautiful woman. Or does he? When a young man is walking through a city, when a young man is walking through a beautiful city, when a young man is walking through the city, one day he sees a beautiful woman. When a young man is walking through a city one night, he sees a beautiful woman. When a young man is walking through the city one night, he sees a beautiful woman. Or does he? And then we take a look at the terrifying true story of a man who seemed to have it all. A great job, a loving wife, a beautiful family. But little does he know all of that is about to change the second he walked in to a movie theater. Today on Dead Rabbit Radio. Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Dead Rabbit Radio. I'm your host, Jason Carpenter. I'm having a great day. I hope you guys are having a great day too. I hope you guys are having tons of fun doing whatever you're doing.